There's a particular kind of quiet that shows up right before everything you believed about a person comes apart. I know that now. Back then, I mistook it for peace. I was 37 years old. I ran the business my grandfather started with one dining room and a hand-painted sign. I had a family that showed up for each other, whether you asked them to or not. And I had a woman across the pillow from me who made me feel, for the first time in my life, like the noise in my chest had finally gone still. Her name was Vanessa. And for a little over a year, I would have told you she was the best thing that ever happened to me. The night she told me her parents wouldn't be coming to the wedding, she didn't cry. She didn't get dramatic. She took my hand, looked at me with these tired, steady eyes, and said, "They hurt me for a long time, Dom. I finally got free of them. I need you to be okay with never meeting them." And I said yes. Of course I said yes. Because I loved her. And because a good man doesn't drag a woman back toward the people who broke her. What I didn't know that night, what I wouldn't know for another 11 months, was that somewhere about 2 hours north of me, there was a man in a faded Red Sox shirt watering a tomato garden in a small town, checking the mailbox every afternoon for a card that never came. He was her father, and he wasn't the monster she'd described. He was just a man waiting for his daughter to come home. My name is Dominic Ferretti. This is the story of the day I knocked on his door. Stay with me, because this one goes somewhere. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever found out the truth about someone a little too late, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get into it. Let me set the table properly, because you can't understand what happened at the end unless you understand where I come from. We're Italian, 3 generations deep in the Boston area, mostly out of Medford now, though my grandfather Antonio started in the North End back when the whole neighborhood smelled like his Sunday gravy. He came over with nothing but a knife roll and a stubborn streak, opened a little trattoria, and worked himself half to death making it something. My father, Salvatore, everyone calls him Sal, took it over and turned one restaurant into 3, plus a catering and events company that does half the weddings on the North Shore. I came in at 28, and we built the rest of it together. We named the flagship after my grandfather. It's just called Antonio's. If you've been to the North End, you've walked past it. But I want to be clear about something because it matters for everything that comes after. In my family, the business was never the point. The business was just how we kept everyone fed and close. The point was Sunday. Sunday dinner at my parents' house is not optional. It is not casual. You do not try to make it. You are there, at the table, at 2 o'clock, or you'd better be in a hospital, and even then my mother is going to want the room numbers so she can bring you food. My mother, Rosa, has made the same lasagna every Sunday of my entire life, and if you don't take a second plate, she looks at you like you've insulted her marriage. My Uncle Vincenzo, Uncle Vinny, lives 4 streets over and has never once in his life knocked before walking into my parents' kitchen. We are loud, we hug too long, we argue about parking spots like they're matters of national security, and we love people the way we cook, all the way, with too much, until you're full whether you wanted to be or not. So when I tell you I met Vanessa at a charity gala in the Seaport, and I was gone inside of 3 months, understand what that means coming from a guy like me. I don't fall fast. I'd been engaged once before, years earlier, and it ended the slow, quiet way things end when 2 people realize they're building different lives. After that, I figured I just wasn't the type. I'd throw myself into work, come home, catch the Sox game, go to Sunday dinner, and be content. And then Vanessa walked across that ballroom in a deep green dress, and everything I thought about myself went out the window. She was a marketing director at a high-end residential design firm downtown, the kind of place that decorates the homes of people whose names are on hospital wings. She was sharp. She was funny in that dry way where you have to be paying attention to catch it. And within 10 minutes of meeting my Uncle Vinny, who had crashed the gala purely because he heard there'd be free wine, she was laughing at his terrible joke about how Italians invented the fork so we'd have something to point at people with. Then she turned to me and asked what I actually did, and when I told her about the restaurants, she asked about my grandfather. Not politely, genuinely. She wanted to know his story. I was done. Right there. I just didn't know it yet. We dated for 14 months. She met my family fast, because in my world there is no other speed. By the 2nd month she was at Sunday dinner. By the 4th she knew that the chair at the head of the table was my father's, and the one to his right was Uncle Vinny's, and she never once sat in it. My mother adopted her the way my mother adopts anyone she decides to love. Completely, immediately, and with an alarming quantity of food. Vanessa learned to fold the tortellini. She learned it badly, and my mother laughed until she cried, and I stood in that kitchen doorway watching the two of them and thought, this is it. This is the whole thing right here. I proposed on the rooftop of a hotel in the seaport, looking out over the harbor, on a Thursday in April because I couldn't wait until the weekend. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence. My mother wept on the phone. My father, a man who has said, I love you to me maybe 4 times in my life, said, good, bring her Sunday so we can do this properly. Uncle Vinny somehow already knew before I called him, which to this day I cannot explain. I was happy. Genuinely, embarrassingly happy, and I had no idea what was already in motion. Here's the thing I need you to understand before you judge me for missing it. Vanessa wasn't cold. She wasn't shady in some obvious way you'd see coming. She was warm and present, and she made me feel chosen. So when the subject of her family came up, and in my world it comes up immediately, because we need to know your people the way we need to know your name, her answer didn't land like a warning. It landed like a scar. We were on the couch in her apartment, maybe 6 weeks in, takeout going cold on the coffee table, some show playing that neither of us was watching. I don't have a relationship with my parents, she said, out of nowhere but not out of nowhere, the way people say a thing they've been circling for a while. I went quiet. Let her talk. They were hard people, my dad especially, controlling, cold. Nothing was ever good enough. I spent my whole childhood trying to earn something that was never going to be there. She turned her wine glass slowly in her hand. I moved out here. I changed my name, my last name, socially. Everything says Sinclair now. That was my grandmother's name. And I just built a life where they couldn't reach me. It's the only way I've ever been okay. She looked at me then, steady, tired, not performing it, or so I thought. Just laying down something heavy and hoping I wouldn't flinch. They won't be at the wedding, Dom. I need you to be okay with that. I need you to not push. And I wasn't going to push. Why would I? She'd given me no reason to doubt a single word. I'd read the articles. I'd known people with families like that. You don't demand a survivor go stand next to the thing that nearly drowned her. I've got you, I told her. You don't ever have to explain them to me again. She put her head on my shoulder and I felt her actually relax. And I thought I'd done something good. The problem wasn't me believing her. The problem was my family. Because the Ferrettis have this bone-deep, cultural, non-negotiable need to know the people attached to the people they love. It isn't nosiness. It isn't judgment. My father would tell you it's respect. You understand a person better when you've sat at the table they grew up at. And as the wedding got closer, the silence around Vanessa's family started to make a sound of its own. It came to a head at a Sunday dinner in July. My mother had made the braciole, the real one, the version that takes her half of Saturday. The whole crew was there. Me, Vanessa, my parents, Uncle Vinny, my cousin Gino and his wife. Everything was warm and normal, plates going around, my father telling a story he's told 200 times, until Uncle Vinny, who has never in his life understood the concept of a bad moment to say something, set down his fork and looked straight at Vanessa. Sweetheart, let me ask you something. She smiled. Sure, Vinny. Where are your people? The table went quiet in that specific way a table goes quiet when somebody finally says the thing everyone's been carefully not saying. Vanessa kept her smile, but her eyes shifted, just slightly. My parents and I aren't close, Vinny. I've mentioned that. I know you mentioned it, he said. I'm asking about it. He wasn't being cruel. He was being Vinny. Because in our family, you don't stand up in a church and marry into a family you've never once seen. That's just not how it's done. Vincenzo. One word from my father, low, and Vinny picked his fork back up. But the question was already sitting in the middle of the table, and no amount of braciole was going to cover it. Later, after Vanessa had gone home, my father found me in the kitchen. He poured 2 small glasses of the good grappa and leaned against the counter. She's a good woman, he said. Not a question. She is. I believe you. He turned the glass in his hand. But Dom, we're going to stand in a church. We're going to make promises in front of God and every person we know, and we're going to do it without ever having shaken one hand from her side of the aisle. Her father was hard on her, Pop. She had a rough... I hear you, and I believe her. He set the glass down. But hard people don't disappear off the earth. They're somewhere. They have a porch. All I'm saying is, I'm not asking you to fix a thing. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into. That's all a man owes himself before he makes a promise that big. Then he squeezed the back of my neck the way he's done since I was 6, and went back to the table. And here's the part I'm not proud of. I still wasn't suspicious. Not of her. If I was worried about anything, I was worried about myself. Because the thought I couldn't shake, driving home that night, was this. What if her parents took one look at me and decided I wasn't what they'd wanted for their daughter? I know how that sounds. Guy with a family like mine, a business like mine. But Vanessa lived in a world I didn't. Downtown design people, gallery openings, friends who wore labels I had to look up. She carried herself with a polish that I loved, but that sometimes, quietly, made me feel like I was a little too loud, a little too much, a little too... Uncle Vinny adjacent. What if her family was that world turned all the way up? What if they had old money and older opinions? And what if Vanessa saw me through their eyes for 1 second and something shifted? That was my actual fear, that I was the underdog, that I'd have to make a case for myself. I had no idea I was worried about the wrong thing entirely. The truth didn't come from a private investigator. It came from a form. We were doing the boring machinery of getting married. License, paperwork, honeymoon documents. Vanessa said she'd handle it all, and I let her, because she handled everything with that effortless competence I'd fallen for. But the marriage license in our state needs a certified copy of the birth certificate, and mine came through fine while hers, she kept saying, was stuck in some backlog. Weeks went by. My office manager, Angela, has run the front of Ferretti's for 19 years and misses nothing. She'd been helping me pull our wedding logistics together, and one Friday afternoon she set a large envelope on my desk with a little frown on her face. Vanessa's certificate finally came, she said, but Dom, the name's not right, or, I don't know, it doesn't match anything. I didn't want to just file it. I picked it up. Certified copy, state seal, the whole thing. Vanessa Marie Doyle, born in Rutland, Vermont. Mother, Kathleen Doyle. Father, Raymond Doyle. Not Sinclair. Doyle. I sat there for a long minute. Sinclair, I told myself, was the grandmother's name, the one she'd taken to get free. Fine. People do that. But Rutland, Vermont? She'd never once mentioned Vermont. Not a town, not a state, not a childhood memory that placed her anywhere. And 2 living parents, right there, named in ink on a state document, when I'd spent a year believing there was nothing to know. I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because I think about it a lot. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't hire anyone. I told myself I just wanted to understand the shape of what she'd survived, so I'd know how to protect her. I ran a plain public record search on the name Raymond Doyle, Rutland, Vermont. It took about 4 minutes, a property record, an old address that had never changed, a phone listing, and a dormant social media profile she'd left up from college, pictures of a much younger Vanessa in a graduation gown, laughing, with an older man's arm around her shoulders and a woman beaming beside them. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like parents at a graduation. I closed the laptop. I told Vanessa that night I had a site visit up north for a possible new location. A lie, my first one, and I felt it in my stomach. She kissed me on the cheek without looking up from her laptop and told me to drive safe. The next morning, I got in the car and drove 2 hours north on the highway, rehearsing introductions the whole way, bracing myself to meet intimidating people who might decide I wasn't good enough. I was so sure that was the story I was driving toward. Rutland is a small city that feels like a big town. I came off the highway a little before 10 in the morning and followed the GPS into a neighborhood of tidy single-story houses, American flags, wide driveways, the kind of street where people wave at cars they don't recognize, just in case they should. I slowed down when the voice told me I'd arrived. It was a small white house with green shutters and a vegetable garden running along one side of the front walk. An old pickup truck sat in the driveway with the hood up. and a man was leaning over the engine. An older guy, maybe late 60s, in a faded Red Sox shirt and reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, wiping his hands on a rag with the unhurried patience of a man who has nowhere more important to be. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, recalibrating everything. There was no gate, no luxury sedan. Nothing about that house suggested that the people inside had ever spent 1 second worrying about whether somebody else was good enough. These were not people who looked down on anyone. These were people who fixed their own truck and grew their own tomatoes, and for one clean, uncomplicated moment, I felt relief. They're not intimidating, they're just regular people. I got out. He noticed me at about 10 feet and straightened up, squinting the cautious way people do when a stranger in nice shoes walks up their driveway. "Help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name's Dominic Ferretti. I'm engaged to your daughter, to Vanessa." Raymond Doyle didn't drop the rag. He dropped everything. His hands, his shoulders, the careful set of his face, all of it just came down. Not with anger, not with suspicion, with relief, with 2 years of grief that had finally found somewhere to land. He turned toward the house and his voice cracked right down the middle of her name. Kath, come out here." And standing in that driveway, watching a retired mechanic try to gather himself, I felt the entire story I'd driven up with flip completely over. Inside, everything I thought I knew came apart quietly, over coffee I hadn't asked for, and a plate of cookies Kathleen set down with shaking hands. The house was clean and small and full of Vanessa. School pictures climbing up the hallway wall, a prom photo on the mantel, that same graduation portrait, framed and centered, Ray's arm around her, Kath's face lit up with a pride that almost hurt to look at. The story came out slow and careful, the way people tell you things when they're afraid that saying them out loud will break something. Ray had run Doyle's auto for 32 years, the only garage in town half the people trusted, he said, with the ghost of a proud smile. Kath had done the books there and worked the school cafeteria, and between them they'd put Vanessa through the University of Vermont without $1 of debt on her name. That was the thing they kept coming back to, without $1 of debt. They'd wanted her to fly. They just never expected her to fly this far out of reach. When she moved to Boston, things changed by inches. Calls got shorter, visits stopped. She started showing up online as Vanessa Sinclair, in rooms full of people they didn't recognize, wearing a version of herself they didn't recognize either. Kath would text and get one-word answers. Ray would leave voicemails and hear nothing back. Then came the wedding. Vanessa had wanted something enormous, a $250,000 wedding, Ray said, the word catching in his throat like it still didn't make sense in his mouth. She'd asked them to remortgage the house, the paid-off house they'd worked their whole lives to own free and clear, to help fund it and to help her buy the right kind of place so she'd look like she came from something. And when they said they couldn't, when they said they'd give her everything they safely could but they couldn't put the house on the line at their age, she told them that if they couldn't invest in her future, they weren't part of it. She blocked them that same night. Kath got up from the table and came back with a small box. Inside were envelopes, a stack of them. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, a card for no reason at all, every one of them sealed, stamped, addressed in Kath's neat handwriting to an apartment in Boston, and every one of them stamped in red and sent back. Returned to sender, and underneath the cards, a bank passbook, an old-fashioned savings account. Kath slid it across the table to me, and I opened it and saw 31 years of small deposits, $20, $50, $100 at Christmas. The account was labeled in Ray's block handwriting, V. Wedding. "We started it the week she was born," Ray said, looking at the table. "We were always going to give it to her. She never even knew it was there." He rubbed his thumb over the corner of the passbook. "She thought we had nothing to give. We just didn't have what she wanted us to lose." These were not the faces of people who'd broken a child. These were the faces of 2 people who'd been broken by one, and were too decent to even call it that. That's when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look. But it was Vanessa. A text she'd sent the night before, the one that had actually pushed me to make this drive, sitting there in the thread. "Babe, huge news." I finally reached out to my parents. They apologized for everything, and they want to meet you for lunch this weekend before they head out of the country. I'm so happy for you to finally meet them. This means the world to me. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Raymond and Kathleen Doyle, sitting across a Formica kitchen table in Rutland, Vermont, the two people my fiancé had just told me had apologized and asked to meet me, completely unaware in that exact moment that their daughter was constructing new parents out of thin air. I turned the phone around and let them read it. Kath read it, set it down, said nothing. Ray looked out the window at his garden for a long, long moment, and I thought about the drive up, my rehearsed introductions, my stupid, gentle fear that I might not be good enough for these people. I almost laughed, right there at the table, because I'd spent weeks bracing to be judged by Vanessa's parents, and here they were, in a house with green shutters and a box of returned cards, and the only person in this entire story who had ever decided someone wasn't good enough was her. It had always been her. The man who'd driven up that highway nervous about making a good impression, that guy was gone by the time I stood up from that table. Before I left, I asked Ray and Kath for one thing. I asked them to trust me for 2 weeks, and I asked them if, when I called, they'd be willing to drive down to Boston. Ray looked at Kath. Kath looked at the box of cards on the table. For what? Ray asked. For dinner, I said. The kind she should have given you a long time ago. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I pulled into our garage a little after 2 in the afternoon, and I sat in my car for 10 full minutes before I went up. Not because I was scared, not because I doubted a single thing I'd just seen, but because I'm my father's son, and my father taught me something about the moment right before a reckoning that most people get wrong. He put it to me once like this, in the kitchen, over that same grappa. Dom, you don't flip the table in the middle of the meal. You let them finish eating. You let them order the dessert, and then you bring the check, and you let them see, all at once, exactly what it cost. A lie you interrupt is just an argument. A lie you let finish building is a confession. So I went upstairs. Vanessa was on the couch with a glass of white wine and her laptop open to venue photos. She looked up and smiled, warm and easy, like I was the best part of her whole day. How was the site visit? Promising, I said. Long drive, though. I sat in your mother's kitchen today and held the birthday cards she mailed you, the ones that came back unopened. I saw the account your father's been putting money in since the week you were born. That's what I want to say. You look beat, she said. Want me to order something? Sure, I said, and sat down beside her. Whatever you're in the mood for. She leaned her head on my shoulder and went back to the venue photos, and I looked at the screen and saw none of it, and on the inside I quietly took apart everything I'd believed and started building something else. Over the next few days, I paid a different kind of attention, not suspicious, just awake. Awake the way you get when you finally understand that every conversation you've been having was happening on 2 levels, and you'd only ever heard one of them. And I started noticing a name, 2 names. Her boss, a man called Preston Whitmore, the founder of her design firm. She mentioned him more than she ever had. Casually. Preston thinks the Ainsley project is going to close early. And his wife, Caroline, was asking about the wedding again. Little mentions. The kind you drop into conversation when you're warming someone up to a name before that name has to matter. She was introducing them to me before I ever met them. She'd been doing it for weeks. I'd just never had a reason to hear it. I looked Preston Whitmore up from my office with the door shut. Founder and principal of the firm, late 50s, silver hair, the effortless confidence of a man who's never once had to justify his presence in a room. His wife Caroline turned up in a society write-up from a museum gala 2 years back. Pearls, highlighted hair, the whole picture. A polished, wealthy, well-regarded couple. Exactly the kind of people you'd want standing beside you if you needed to convince a big, loud Italian family that you'd come from somewhere impressive. And that's when I finally understood Vanessa. Not as a villain, but as something sadder. She wasn't just lying. She was trapped inside her own insecurity. She'd spent a decade in Boston reinventing herself, tailoring every detail to climb a ladder my family didn't even see, but her downtown world did, and when her father wouldn't burn down his retirement to fund the illusion, she didn't experience that as a disagreement about money. In her mind, a modest house in Rutland and a dad in a Red Sox shirt were a threat, proof that could puncture the whole story she'd bled to build. So she didn't just leave her parents behind, she erased them. And then, because a wedding needs parents, she went looking for a better pair. I thought hard about what she must have told the Whitmores to get them to agree to something like this. Because people like Preston and Caroline don't get where they are by being careless. For them to sit across a table and introduce themselves as her mother and father, she'd have to have given them a story that held together, something sad enough that two prominent, busy people would say yes without asking too many questions. It came together for me 2 days later, when a reminder popped up on our shared calendar in her handwriting. Lunch, Preston and Caroline. Saturday, 12:30. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, babe. This means everything. I looked at that word again. Everything. And I thought about Kathleen Doyle sliding a passbook across a kitchen table. Yeah, I'll bet it does. I called my father from the parking garage under our building, engine running. I need to talk to you. Come to the house. 20 minutes later, I was at my parents' kitchen table in Medford, the same table where Vanessa had folded tortellini badly and made my mother cry laughing, where Uncle Vinny had asked his question. I laid all of it out. Rutland, Ray and Kath, the cards, the passbook, the text, Preston and Caroline Whitmore. My father listened without a single interruption. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me 4 words. What do you need? No lecture. No, I told you so. No drama. I need to go to this lunch, I said. And then I need to build something bigger. He nodded slowly. And the parents, the real ones. I want them there. I'm going back up. I want to know if they'll be part of what comes next. And what comes next? A dinner, I said. A real one, at Antonio's, with the right people in the room. He was quiet another beat. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and said, I'll take care of the room. And that was the whole conversation. My mother's reaction was less contained. She'd been in the doorway the entire time. In our house that isn't eavesdropping, that's just being present. With her arms crossed and a look on her face I can only describe as the specific, holy fury of an Italian mother who has fed someone at her own table and been lied to. She folded pasta in my kitchen, Dominic. Her voice was low and terrible. And that poor woman up in Vermont has a box of Christmas cards that came back to her house unopened. I know, Ma. She crossed the room, took my face in both hands the way she's done since I was small, and looked at me for a long moment. You fix this, she said quietly. Not just for you. For them. Then I dealt with Uncle Vinny, which required immediate management, because the second I told him the story, he stood up and announced he was going to say something to Vanessa, right at the door. No, Vinny. I put both hands on his shoulders. I need you to do the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. I need you to not say one word. Not one. Until I stand up to speak. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at my father. He chewed the inside of his cheek like a man being asked to hold his breath underwater. Fine, he finally said. But I want a double order of the arancini before anybody else sits down, and I'm holding the door when we walk out of there. That, I said, I can absolutely promise you. Every piece was in place. The restaurant Vanessa picked for the lunch was one of those downtown places where the lighting is engineered to make everyone look slightly more important than they are. She made the reservation, of course. I got there 5 minutes early and took the seat facing the door. They came in together, Vanessa in the middle, one hand looped through Preston Whitmore's arm, Caroline on his other side. Vanessa was glowing. Preston moved with the easy authority of a man who has never doubted he belongs anywhere. Caroline was all gracious smiles and careful posture, pearls at her collarbone. I stood, big smile, firm handshake. Dom, Vanessa said, her voice warm with a particular kind of triumph, this is my dad, Preston, and my mom, Caroline. My dad, my mom. Not Ray, not Kath. It's so good to finally meet you both, I said. I've heard so much. I'd heard nothing, because these two people had not existed in this role until about a week ago. We sat. Menus opened, and for 20 minutes I watched my fiancée perform with a fluency that, in any other circumstance, I'd have found genuinely impressive. She laughed at Preston's observations half a beat too fast. She referenced shared memories, a trip, a restaurant, a Christmas, and Caroline tracked along the way a person does when they're working from a script they only half memorized, nodding a little too readily. Preston was smoother. He asked about the business, made intelligent comments about the North Shore market, and generally behaved like a man who'd done his homework and was determined to be convincing. Everybody at that table was performing. The whole thing was a stage, and I sat there eating branzino, being perfectly, effortlessly charming. "So, Preston," I said, setting my fork down with the calm of a man who has not one single concern in the world. "Vanessa's told me so much about you. Clearly you've been a huge part of her life." Preston smiled. "She's been like a daughter to us." "There it is." "That means a lot," I said. I looked at Vanessa when I said it. She beamed back. "Keep smiling, sweetheart." "I'll be honest with you both," I went on, leaning in the way I do in a negotiation when I want someone to feel let in on something. "My family's traditional, Italian, on my father's side. We take this stuff seriously, the formality of it, welcoming people properly. My parents would never forgive me if we didn't do this the right way." I paused. "We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Saturday. Nothing overwhelming. Family, a good meal, a toast. My folks just need to welcome the people who matter to Vanessa before we get to the altar." Preston glanced at Caroline, half a second of silent calculation. "We'd be honored." Under the table, Vanessa grabbed my hand so hard I felt it in my shoulder. "Perfect," I said, and smiled at her. She smiled back, the full, radiant, triumphant smile of a woman who is certain she has just won. The trap was already built. She walked into it beaming. If you're still with me, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. And stick around, because the next part is the part I drove 2 hours and waited 2 weeks for. I spent the next 6 days moving carefully. Monday, I drove back up to Rutland. I called Ray from the driveway before I even knocked, and he had the door open before I finished. We sat in the same kitchen, the same coffee, the same table. I told them everything, the lunch, Preston, Caroline, the engagement dinner I'd arranged. Kath's hands went still around her mug. "Dom, we don't want to make a scene. We're not those people." "You won't have to make a scene, Kath." I looked right at her. "My mother is going to stand at a church in a few weeks and welcome whoever walks through those doors into our family for the rest of our lives. She deserves to know who that actually is, and you deserve to be in the room, not for drama, just because you're her parents, and somebody in this whole thing needs to finally say that out loud in front of everyone." Ray reached over and put his hand over Kath's. He looked at me for a long moment. "What time should we be there?" Tuesday, I sat with my father and Uncle Vinny in my father's study and walked them through the whole thing, step by step. My father asked 2 precise questions and then said, "I'll handle the kitchen. Your mother's already handling the menu." My mother, it turned out, had decided to add a small framed photo of my grandparents to the welcome table, because they should be in the room too, she said, and I had to leave the house for a minute after she told me that. By Saturday, everything was set. The private room at the back of Antonio's, my grandfather's restaurant, my father's choice, and the right one. White linen, candles, the kind of warm light that makes a room feel like somebody's home instead of a stage. Ray and Kathleen Doyle would drive down Saturday afternoon and check into a hotel near the water. Ray called me Thursday night to confirm, his voice steady and careful, and at the end, after we'd gone over the details, he said something I've never forgotten. "Dom, whatever happens in that room, thank you for driving up here. For knocking on that door." A pause. "She picked a good one, even if she doesn't know it yet." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "I'll see you Saturday, Ray." Saturday came with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from certainty. Vanessa spent 3 hours getting ready. 3 hours. I sat in the living room with a Sox game on low and let her have every minute of it. She came out twice to ask my opinion, once about earrings, once about the shoes, and both times I told her she looked beautiful, because she did. That was never the issue. The issue was everything underneath the beautiful. She wanted to head over early to check the setup. I told her to go ahead, that I had a quick call to make and I'd meet her there. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door looking like every single thing in her life was exactly on track. The moment the door closed, I called Ray. "You good?" I asked. "We're ready." His voice was quiet and solid, the voice of a man who'd decided something a while ago. "Kath's dressed. We're ready." "Okay. When I text you, you walk in. Doesn't matter what's happening at the table. You walk in, and you stand there, and you don't have to say a single word." A pause. "Dom. She's going to see us the second that door opens." "I know. I want you ready for—" "I've been ready for 2 years," he said, and it stopped me. "I've been ready since the night she blocked us. Every time Kath's birthday came and the phone didn't ring. We'll be there." I held the phone for a second after he hung up. Then I put on my jacket, checked the inside pocket for the ring, and left. Antonio's on a Saturday night is exactly what it should be. Packed, loud, the smell of garlic and lemon hitting you at the door like an old friend. But the private room in the back runs on a different frequency. Quieter, intentional. My mother had been there since 4 in the afternoon, and when I walked in at 6:30, she was adjusting the flowers on the table with the focused energy of a woman who understands that the details of a room tell people how seriously you take them. She looked up, studied my face the way she studied it since I was old enough to have something to hide. "You okay?" "Yeah, Ma." She crossed the room and took my face in both hands. "Your grandfather used to say the truth always finds the biggest chair in the room, even when nobody invited it." She smoothed my collar. "Let it sit down tonight." I nearly lost it right there. Nearly. My father was by the bar with my cousin Gino, already in his charcoal suit, completely composed. One slow nod when he saw me. That nod said, "The room is right. Do what you came to do." Uncle Vinny was at a side table with a plate of arancini and the concentrated expression of a man honoring a sacred vow of silence. He pointed at the plate, then at me. I held up my end. "Don't forget yours." They arrived at 7. I heard Vanessa's laugh in the hallway before the door even opened. That social laugh, half a note higher than her real one, the one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's walked into it. She came in first, in a deep navy dress, hair perfect, every detail right. Preston Whitmore followed, silver hair, expensive suit, the easy authority of a man who's never once questioned his right to be anywhere. Caroline beside him, gracious and polished, pearls at her throat. Vanessa moved through that room like she owned it. She kissed my mother on both cheeks. She took my father's hand in both of hers. She touched Caroline's arm and laughed at something near the drinks. She was magnificent, genuinely, terrifyingly magnificent. She reached me, slipped her arm through mine, and leaned up close. "This is perfect," she whispered. "Your family is incredible. This is everything I wanted." "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She heard a compliment. I meant something else entirely. We sat. The food came. My mother spread, dish after dish, fresh bread in a cloth-lined basket. Preston was smooth and engaged, asking my father about the restaurants with what looked like real interest. Caroline complimented the room. My mother received it graciously while privately thinking thoughts I will never fully know. Vanessa glowed, relaxed, victorious. I ate. I laughed at the right moments. I refilled glasses. By every visible measure, I was a completely at-ease man enjoying dinner with his family. My phone sat face down in my jacket. I had one text to send, and I was waiting for the exact right moment. It came at 8:04, in that small lull between the main course and whatever comes next. The wine was flowing, the room was warm, and Vanessa was mid-laugh at something Preston said. I slid the phone out under the table and typed one word to Ray: "Now." Then I stood up and tapped a knife against my glass. That clean, clear note that tells a room to stop and listen. The table settled. Vanessa looked up at me with that full, radiant smile. The smile of a woman who is certain the next 60 seconds are a toast about how much I love her. I let the silence sit one beat longer than was comfortable. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I said. Calm, measured, the way my father talks when something actually matters. In our family, a dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a declaration. It's us saying, these people are real. These people matter. And we don't say that lightly. I looked slowly around the table. My father taught me that the people you bring to your table tell everyone exactly who you are. I paused. So I want to make sure that tonight we have the right people at this one. I looked toward the back of the room where Tony, our floor manager, was standing. He knew his cue. He walked to the side door and pushed it open, and in walked Raymond and Kathleen Doyle. Ray in his navy blazer, the one that didn't quite fit the way it used to, the one you could tell he'd owned for years and saved for the occasions that mattered. Kath in a burgundy dress, a small purse clutched in both hands, her chin up, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd decided she was not going to come apart in public no matter what happened next. They walked into the silence of that room, and Vanessa saw them. I was watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color left it like a tide pulling out. Fast, complete, absolute. Her lips parted. The hand holding her wine glass went still, and the glass tipped, and I reached over without looking and steadied it and set it down gently on the linen. She turned to me. Her eyes were doing the rapid math of someone hunting for the story that saves her. I could see it happening in real time. The search for the exit, the angle, the version of this she could still control. Dom. Her voice came out thin, barely a voice. I went to Rutland, I said, quietly. I wasn't performing for the room. I was talking to her. 3 weeks ago, I drove up on a Saturday morning because I told myself, maybe I can fix this for her. Maybe I can give her back her family as a wedding gift. I let it land. I found a man fixing his truck in the driveway in a Red Sox shirt. I told him my name and he dropped the rag and called for his wife. The room was one held breath. Your father ran a garage for 32 years, Vanessa. Your mother did the books and worked the school cafeteria. They put you through college without $1 of debt because they wanted you to fly. My voice stayed level. They offered you everything they safely had, and you told them that if they couldn't fund your future, they weren't part of it, and you blocked them that same night. Her mouth opened. You don't understand the whole... I sat in their kitchen, I said, and it landed like a door closing. I saw your school pictures going up the hallway. I held the birthday cards your mother mailed you, the ones that came back to her house unopened, in a box she keeps. And I saw the savings account your father's been putting money into since the week you were born, labeled for your wedding. You never even knew it was there. She had nothing. And while I was sitting at that table, I said, you texted me. You told me your parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch. I turned to Preston and Caroline Whitmore. Caroline had both hands pressed flat on the table. Preston had gone completely still. Preston. Caroline. My voice shifted to something quieter and respectful, because they weren't the villains here. I think I know what she told you, that her real parents had passed away years ago, that my family was judgmental and traditional, and she asked you to step in, to stand beside her so she wouldn't have to walk into a wedding alone. She used your kindness. She used your names to fill 2 empty chairs. I gestured toward the door, where Ray and Kath stood. But those are her parents. Right there. They're alive, and they drove 2 hours to be here. Caroline looked at Vanessa, a long, slow look, the kind that doesn't need words because words would just be less than it. Then she looked at Ray and Kath, and something crossed her face that was worse than anger. It was recognition. The specific recognition of a woman who has just understood that the person she thought she knew does not exist. Preston said nothing. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, and it was the gesture of a man who has decided to leave and has concluded there's nothing worth saying first. I turned back to Vanessa one last time. She'd stopped looking for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She was just looking at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. The whole architecture of everything she'd built reflected back at her from every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat everybody like they counted, I said. The kid who parks the cars, the woman who cleans the office, the mechanic in Vermont who gives everything he has and gets told it isn't enough. I reached into my jacket. That's the measure I was raised with, not the address, not the job title, not the pearls. I took the ring out. And by that measure, I don't know who you are. I set the ring down on the white linen in front of her. Not thrown, not dramatic, just placed. The way you set down something you've been carrying too long and are finally ready to put down for good. Then I picked up the small vase of flowers from the center of our table, white, simple, my mother's choice, and I walked across the room to Kathleen Doyle. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, in her shoulders, in the short, careful way she was breathing. The way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to drop it in public. I held the flowers out to her. She looked at them. She looked at me. And then Kathleen Doyle, who had driven 2 hours, pressed her best dress, and held her chin up through the hardest walk of her life, took the flowers and came apart. Not loudly, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from 2 years of grief finally finding somewhere to go. Ray had his arm around her before the first sound left her. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, his chin steady, and then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward, Kath still tucked under his arm, and put his free hand out to me. I shook it. He gripped hard, the grip of a man saying something his voice couldn't carry yet. My father was beside me then. I don't know exactly when he moved. Sal Ferretti just materializes when it matters. He looked at Ray for a moment, then put out his hand. "I'm Salvatore," he said. "I should have met you a long time ago. I'm sorry for that." Ray shook it and swallowed once. "Ray." A breath. "Thank you for raising a man like that." My father glanced at me sideways, just for a second, just long enough. In 37 years, it's the proudest I have ever seen him look. My mother didn't shake Kath's hand. She pulled her into a full embrace, both arms, immediate and unconditional, the way she holds anyone who needs holding. Kath held on. The flowers were still in her hands. We walked out together, the Ferrettis and the Doyles. My mother's arm through Kath's. My father and Ray side by side with the quiet ease of 2 men who just recognized something in each other. Gino holding doors, Uncle Vinny bringing up the rear, honoring his vow right to the very end. At the main door, Vinny stopped and turned back once. So did I. Vanessa was still sitting at the center of that table, in her perfect dress, in the perfectly constructed life she'd bled to build, the ring on the linen in front of her. Preston and Caroline were already at the far end of the room, Caroline in her coat, Preston's hand at the small of her back, neither of them looking back at her as they left. Her downtown friends, the crowd she'd curated and performed for and built an entire second self around, sat frozen in their chairs with the specific discomfort of people who've just witnessed something they can't unsee and don't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered a kinder version of events, because there were no more parts to play. The whole cast had walked out. She just sat there, finally, completely, irreversibly seen. Vinny looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head once, slow, almost sad, and let the door close behind him. Outside on the sidewalk, the north end moved around us like it had no idea what had just happened. My father put his hand on the back of my neck, the way he's done since I was a kid, and didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly, "Your grandfather would have done exactly the same thing." That was all he said. It was enough. Across the sidewalk, Ray Doyle stood looking up at the skyline with Kath tucked under his arm, the white flowers still in her hands, both of them breathing the cool night air like 2 people who'd just been handed back something they'd given up on ever seeing again. Ray caught me looking and nodded once, not a thank you nod, something that doesn't quite have a word. I nodded back.